Hugo Ball's Flight Out of Time, published in 1927, offers a revised account of the personal diaries the author kept for the years 1910-21. Though the book provides one of the most relevant documents on the birth of the Dada movement in 1916, Hugo Ball's aim was to outline his own shift from a commitment to an activist aesthetic towards a new awareness of spiritual authenticity based on a mystical and ascetic interpretation of Catholicism. As a result of the adoption of the diary format, the book is very closely connected to the issues of time and temporality. Ball, in fact, does not dwell on personal and background details. His aim is to provide a depiction of the unity of his life and intellectual struggles, as he is convinced that ideas should be identical with the person who advocates them. The style of an author should represent his philosophy without his expressly developing it. At the time he carefully revised the book, Ball firmly believed that the ultimate aim of his literary vocation was to be a Catholic writer. Not surprisingly then, the book opens with a quotation from Augustine in Adatio Psalmum 68. You can read the quotation. It's about it's an exhortation about being brave, because following in the footsteps of Christ, who could endure many sufferings. So the Christian has to be brave in following Christ. Whose memoirs, Augustine's memoirs, have provided throughout the centuries the model for autobiographical writing within the Western tradition. This is the common thread running through the book. However, even at a first glance, Ball's flight seems to defy the idea of the harmonious linear constitution of a male self, which was crucial in the autobiographical tradition. The structure of the book consists of loose episodes, notes, reflections, dreams, omissions, and blind spots, and even of contradictions, highly reminiscent of the arrangement of sketches in theatrical performances. Each entry in his diary constitutes an event, rightness, which appears to have taken place at precisely that moment in a present unfolding on the blank page. In this way, Ball presents his diary as a work in progress, approaching its end without ultimately reaching it. Therefore, though it has often been read as an important proof of Ball's distancing himself from his engagement in the Dada movement, Flight Out of Time resembles very closely the technique of Dadaistic collages, which again explains the non-linear and fragmented structure of the book. As the author says, the present does not exist in principles, but only in association. We live in a fantastic age that draws its decision more from affiliation and affiliation than from unassailable axioms. The artist has the freedom to shape, reshape, and assemble these fragments of present as he likes. It is, all in all, common property, matter. Time, thus, becomes the material of Ball's work. At one point in this book, Ball overtly mentions the theatricality of his technique, talking of change of scene or reconstruction, that would be in German Verwandlung, Umbau, in relation to the 2 days that have passed since his last journal entry. He does not even believe in a uniform monolithic structure of the self, since in his view, every person has many egos at the same time. Man has many egos, just as the onion has many skins. It is not a matter of one ego more or less. The center is still made of skins. Therefore the invitation, let us rewrite life every day. Life itself becomes the matter of the artistic work, since becoming a human being is an art, states Ball, stressing once again the dimension of transformation as a key notion to the understanding of his work. The prologue, entitled The Backdrop, as you can see, with another theatrical image, entails a precise mention of the year Ball's life account starts in his diary and in his book with 1913, the year before the war. As will be shown, the very term time frequently occurs throughout Ball's book. though it might be argued that its meaning alters according to the context. As Ball well knew from his model, Augustine, the phenomenon of time defies an easy definition, since it can never be made directly observable. If we take a closer look at the structure of Augustine's Confessions, we then see that the question about time introduces the 11th book that marks a break within the work. The autobiographical narration quite abruptly stops here, and the author undertakes instead a thorough explanation of the creation story and an allegorical interpretation of the 7 days during which it took place. But in the act of confessing and professing its own faith, the past in its entirety, as recalled in Augustine's memoirs, unfolds itself before God and becomes present. The unity of the past does not come from the detailed list of what has happened before the conversion, but from the awareness of God's enduring love in his life, even if Augustine has failed for 30 years to recognize it. For this reason, Augustine passes from autobiography to an anti-Manichaean exegesis of Genesis and creation, switching from his individual life story to universal history. I emphasize the lines in this quotation that are more relevant to my paper. And if I have the capacity to proclaim this in an ordered narrative, yet the drops of time are too precious to me. This is also Ball's aim. His diary stops at the time he begins to write Byzantinisches Christentum, a work on 3 saints and mystics of the early church that, like the 11th book of Augustine's Confessions, signals a turning point in his intellectual and aesthetic development. Augustine's words echo in Hugo Ball's own statement about autobiographical writing. People who keep a record of their experiences are resentful, vengeful people whose vanity has been wounded. They cling to their records and documents as desperately as Shylock clung to his bond. They believe in a kind of lost judgment. All the diaries, that's in the end, correspondence and memoranda, what else could they be for? The quotation marks clear that autobiographies merely based on facts and documentary evidence and driven by the search for justification before one's contemporaries and one's descendants cannot provide a deeper meaning, since they fail to reflect the unity of one life's course. They are bound to a bourgeois economic understanding of time that should be then applied to life as if life writing itself were tantamount to mere accounting practices and, teleologically, tend to a coherent objective. The irreducible excess of the own life account should be avoided in this sort of autobiography and then sacrificed on the altar of a reliable life report. Ball's own life account, however, seems almost paradoxical. On the one hand, he aims to outline the spiritual line of development, leaving out everything private and casual. On the other, he admits the personal occasion that led to him reviewing his life. The choice of the diary format, with its loose entries, reflects on the formal level the striving for a definitive coherence in his own life, although, even after the return to the Catholic faith and the choice to lead an ascetic existence, he does not achieve that ultimate peace of mind and instead keeps inventing, shaping and reshaping his own character, while making no attempt to cover up those contradictions and conflicts that are instead part of an individual's development. Producere, notes Ball, means to produce, to bring into existence. It does not have to be books. One can produce artists too. As Carola Hilms puts it, Ball's flight is an invention rather than an inventory. Like all living art, life also leaves behind documents not of edification, but of paradox. World and society around 1913, Ball's departing point, are torn loose from their erstwhile association with natural cycles and processes, regulated by rituals and festivals. Momentous changes such as urbanization, secularization, commercialization determine life organization ruled by the chronometer, the symbol of a representation of time according to the principle of successive instants, leading in a linear direction from a past that is gone forever to a not yet actualized future. The economic and linear organization of time of his age, of Baal's age, based on the primacy of matter and machines, on the destruction of myth and religion, which are instead founded on a different conceptualization of time and temporality, could, in Baal's view, before and soon after the outbreak of the First World War, only be opposed by means of aesthetics, especially of theater and painting. Baal dwells on painting, especially on those of the Expressionists and of the Futurists, and then on Kandinsky and Picasso, particularly on those two, on both two. They convey an energy that seems to burst out of their frames, thus announcing the coming of a new era, the birth of the divine child once again. By exploding their frames, which means by exceeding the conventional categories of vision and perception, and introducing the issue of energy, they also undermine the linear understanding of time and its economic organization, as mentioned before. Energy, energia, as an in-between medial process among bodies, thoughts, subjects, and objects, allows the paintings to take part in the flow of life, to participate in the transformation, the principle that lies at the foundation of life and of being. Energy also affects the public, whom it comes into contact and mutual exchange with, thus constituting the core of a new ideal community. When we said Kandinsky and Picasso, Baal writes, we meant not painters, but priests, not craftsmen, but creators of a new world, of new words and new paradises. The choice of religious and liturgical words should not be overlooked. Art should not be considered a fossil of the time in which it originated, since the form of every work of art displays a complex, multifaceted and multi-layered time structure. Works of art also entail overt references to themselves, to their genesis and their making. They are not static, but performative. Besides their synesthetic aspect, Baal underlines that the ultimate purpose of Kandinsky's painting was not merely to create works of art, but to represent art as such. At the time when Hugo Baal meets Kandinsky, he believes that theater is the art form that can fulfill what the avant-garde painters have announced in their works, the birth of a new world opposed to the materialistic ideology of progress and profit, as young as it was on the day of creation, populated by people who do not confuse business cycles with life and their interests with fate. Theater goes one step farther than painting. It strives for the creation of a new society. In its attempt to do this, theater also experiments with alternative patterns of time and temporality, opposed to everyday routine along with its misery to the rhythms of modern life. Baal is indeed seeking for new and alternative images of time and of its overcoming, as he will later find in the rich and almost inexhaustible millenarian symbolic tradition of the Catholic Church. Herein, Baal sees the unity of word and image, of time and space that he had yearned for in his Dada days. Christ is image and word, that word and the image are crucified. The shift to his later commitment to an ascetic Catholic ideal has already been prefigured in these words. One of the reasons of Baal's strong rejection of Protestantism, in my opinion, can be seen precisely in this point. He believes that the absolute cannot be conceived of as an abstract. It has to take shape in time to become flesh and blood, word and image, thus going beyond conventional concepts of chronological organization. The vita contemplativa of the saints is in fact, in Baal's view, never abstract, but always a striving to merge in word and image. In this sense, Flight Out of Time could be read as a part as well as a prosecution of the avant-garde search for artistic urbilder, primeval original images, whose exemplarity was not to be confined to the realm of aesthetics. They maintain their influence in Baal's late work, for he has mystically and religiously interpreted and rewritten them. That applies also to the own life account. During the Dada period, Bal experiments furthermore with taste, cadence, rhythm and melody by breaking off with all theater conventions and trying out instead new concepts of temporality in the simultaneous performance of different arts and media. It creates a work of art, a monumental Kunstwerk, that would be the German term for it, which in contrast to Richard Wagner's Gesamtkunstwerk does not aim to unify and render uniform the different media involved in, but to point out the differences among them. Is more interested in medial dissonances than harmony. That obviously leads to an emphasis on the role of the instant, of the present moment, which is crucial for the performer as well as for the recipients, since the performance does not obey the rules of temporal succession. This also deeply influences Bal's understanding of autobiographical writing, as we have seen. Distancing himself from the mechanistic age of the strict measurement of time, which culminated in the outbreak of the war, Bal believes in individuals who are never identical, who therefore never act in identical ways at the same time. Moreover, life wants to be shaped not only at certain times, but at every moment in a continuous process of transformation. As Bal will state in another side build, metaphor, image of time, recalling that of the new painting bursting out of their frames, the central clock of an abstract epoch has exploded. Moving from the chaos of his own age, Bal's account of his life both counters with the aesthetic experiment of Dada and opposes the split and accelerated perception of reality by drawing up new, non-linear concepts of chronological and spatial relations. Time functions as the backdrop, hence the title of the first part of the book, against which the artist performs his both aesthetically and politically anarchistic gesture. One can stand outside society or lie outside it. However, when the situation becomes worse, one can be domiciled outside of times generally, and not just outside society, and dependent solely on communication with the dead. Bal continues, however, recommending caution. Remove yourself as far as possible from the times in order to assess them, but do not lean so far out of the window that you fall down. There are again two antithetical movements at work in this paradoxical image. The flight out of one's own age, the backdrop, the window frame, is the necessary condition of temporality in the sense of being in the time. Detaching oneself from one's own age also means opening up the mind to the hidden yet alive traces of another form of chronological organization based on the belief in the improbable. That's what Bal calls a transcendental life. For the author, the realm of the improbable also includes tradition, strangeness, and the supernatural, which are subject to other forms of organization. The image of time as a window recalls to mind in its mediality the quotation about the new avant-garde paintings. They seem to explode out of their frames, announcing a new age, yet they belong to the age that gave birth to them, while at the same time looking back to an ancient iconic tradition which has its core in the ascetic and priestly ideal of the early church. To understand Cubism, perhaps we have to read the early fathers. There is no absolute, objectively measurable idea of time anymore, but the simultaneous coexistence of at last two different strains of time and temporality. In order to understand this point, which seems to me crucial for a better view of Bal's work and also of his scandalous conversion, I shall take up the notion of Eigenzeit, proper time, peculiar time. I'm looking for a right or correct German translation for English translation for it, as it has been formulated in German sociology and by Luhmann. The complexity and differentiation of modern society and the specialization of the different partial systems it is composed of have led to the emergence of a large number of peculiar chronological structures unfolding at the same time, but nevertheless following their own particular laws. The Enlightenment has its time, and we cannot strike it out of history, notes Ball, but it is not the only modus vivendi. In the end, the writer flees with a paradoxical bidirectional movement towards two apparently opposing points in time and space, back to the Catholic faith of his childhood in Germany, and forward to a new beginning and to a new existence, following in the footsteps of ancient saints anywhere but Germany. The flight out of contemporary time leads to a manifold structure of temporality that implies the simultaneous being at home in many different chronological orders. The childhood, with its own laws, which are also those of art and religion. The mystic Christian tradition, one's own historical age. The dream insights that allow deep insights into life events. The self, a multiple self, as we have seen, cannot help being involved in his own age, even if it's a rotten age, since nobody can entirely remove himself out of the moral corruption of his time. The spatial dimension of his exile in Switzerland counters therefore the very idea of a flight out of time. Switzerland thus becomes, in Ball's words, a chronotopos that contrasts in many ways with Germany, which is characterized by war, Prussian militarism, transcendental philosophy, Hegelian understanding of history, and mechanical organization of state and society. Switzerland, on the other hand, is a natural paradise, an archaic remote world on the borders, far from the destruction of the war, but at the same time the starting point for a counter-movement in world history, which will revitalize and rejuvenate an exhausted Europe. However, unsurprisingly, given the overtly paradoxical structure of the flight, the book, or fictionalized diary, does not end up with Ball's setting in Switzerland, but with a reference to a new beginning back in the disappointing homeland he has so criticized. Wir reisen nach Deutschland, we travel to Germany. Moreover, the discovery of the world of Christian asceticism lays the foundation for a new understanding of time and temporalities, sub specie aeternitatis, described as a dynamic process, as a continuous approaching movement towards the foundation of human existence, inspired by the example of the great mystics and saints. We have to lose ourselves if we want to find ourselves. And in 1921, Ball further underlines the never-ending character of his flight, linking it up with his previous efforts to rediscover the old magical words, to name the word as if for the first time, a flight in search of an approximate naming of the fundamentals determining this flight. And with a final paradoxical image condensing the chronological and the spatial dimension of his movement, we did not flee from life, we sought it out. This too is a way to renunciation. The inner profusion of disappointments automatically brings alienation along with it. One needs isolation to find oneself again and to understand what has happened, what is to befall. Thank you very much for your attention.